We're still going to wait a few more minutes.
All right, and we are now streaming live on YouTube. I'm going to continue letting people in as they pop into the room. So Mocha, thank you for joining us. If you're not muted, if you can mute your line, we will get the conversation started just as soon as we get everyone in the room.
We're still going to wait a few more minutes.
All right, and we are now streaming live on YouTube. I'm going to continue letting people in as they pop into the room.
There is an echo.
So Mocha, thank you for joining us. If you're not muted, if you can mute your line. Give me 1 second. All right, and we are now. All right, let me know if you still hear the echo. Quay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. You should not have an echo anymore.
So far, so good.
Great.
We're going to wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. All right, I think we're going to wait about 1 more minute and then we'll get rolling. Thanks for your patience, everyone. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and start. It's 9:08, and my assumption is that people will trickle in over the next few minutes, but we know everybody's busy and we want to get rolling. So first, I want to thank everyone for joining us, Mocha Moms, family, friends, anyone who's interested in this conversation, we welcome you. We're happy to have you here with us tonight. Happy Thursday. We have a very appropriate conversation taking place tonight, a much needed, much warranted conversation. We're really excited to hear what our guest speaker has to say. But first, I'd like to introduce the Mocha Moms Incorporated National Board, starting with Shelley English Figueroa, our national founder and our national director of chapter chartering.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As Quay Teltmatic says, she's our national president, by the way. I am one of the founders of Mocha Moms, and I wear many hats. And I also serve as the president emerita for the organization. I am so excited that we are together in this space, having this really very, very, very important conversation today. So I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait. Thank you.
Mocha?
Good evening, Mochas and family and friends. My name is LaShawn Martin. I am your National Vice President of Operations. I am thrilled to be here, very excited about the conversation. Looking forward to what our guest speaker has to share with us this evening. So thank you for joining us. Just to let you know, we are streaming live on YouTube. We are also streaming live on Facebook. So invite your friends, invite your family. This is an important topic. Glad to have you.
Thanks, LaShawn. Kim, are you there?
Hello, I'm Kim Scott. I'm the National Treasurer, and welcome everyone. I'm also very excited to hear the topic from our speaker tonight, and hopefully we will gain a lot of insight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Shalana, are you there?
I am. Hello, my name is Shalon Newton. I'm the National Director of Corporate Sponsors and Partners. And I welcome everyone. I'm really looking forward to having this dialogue with you all this evening as well.
Great. Tiffany?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Tiffany Carr, your National Director of Community Service. I'm so excited about tonight's conversation as we all have kids of different ages, and this conversation about race and racism is a constant conversation, and this is a perfect opportunity now to learn as much as we can so we could share with our kids. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, Tiffany. And last but not least, certainly, Danielle Eicher, who is our new National Director of Advocacy and Public Policy. And we are so honored to have her step into this role at this very, very important time.
Thank you, Quay. Again, I am Danielle Eicher, and just thrilled to have you all join us, and thrilled that we are having this conversation about how we mothers of color, Black mothers in particular, are talking to our children about race and racism. And I do want to be explicit in this conversation because it is public and open to the public, but this is a moment when we as mamas are centering our voices and our needs, what we need for our children. Because the conversation is different. We mothers of color have to speak to our children about race and racism differently than we are asking white mothers to do. Hang on, assuming white mothers with white children, because there are white mothers with Black and brown children also. And we have to have a very different conversation. We have to be willing to talk to them about this moment that we're in, which is not new for so many of us, right? So we have to be able to talk to them about this moment that we're in, how we got here, why we got here, without damaging their esteem, without damaging their confidence, without damaging their connection to our people. And so that is what we're going to talk about tonight. And that's so, so important. So Trina Green Brown is our guest tonight. When I asked her what she wanted me to say about her in introducing her, she said that I'm a mom. And so we can all relate to the incredible significance and importance of that role. She also, though, comes to this discussion with a 15-year history and experience as a youth organizer in ending violence. And so that's a big piece of her identity and how she approaches her work. She describes herself as a proud Black feminist mama activist. And ladies, that is where we are going at this moment in time. So in 2016, she founded Parenting for Liberation as a virtual platform. But now it is a book, and it is launching on June 19th, Juneteenth. So, and there'll be, it is posted in our chat, how you access that, and how you can pre-order and order her book. So without any further ado, I will hand it right on over to Trina Green Brown. Trina, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here with a group of Black mamas, moms of color, in this moment. It feels very ripe, and it also does feel like an ongoing conversation that we've always had in our community. And so I'm honored to be in this conversation with you. As Danielle has shared, I am a community educator. I've done work with young people. Before I even became a parent, I was working with young people in schools, doing youth development, youth leadership, and youth activism. And so I usually hold my sessions in community we would normally be sitting in a circle, and we would be in a room together. And I still invite that energy in the space. I appreciate seeing your faces. So thank you for those who have your videos on and you're in this with me. Because I think that that's the beauty of this group of Mocha moms, is that you all are in this together, right? So that you don't feel alone. And so as I even hold space, I'm inviting you all to center your own expertise. You are experts. You are experienced mothers who are raising these children. And so I really want you to bring that expertise into the room. Your experience makes you an expert. And so there are some challenges and limitations to being virtual. So, I'm used to breaking up into small groups and having you all connect. But we will work with this format because of the current pandemic and how we are all living in this virtual realm. So we'll make do with what we have. I'm going to start sharing a slide deck for folks. Let's make sure that comes up. There we are. So this conversation that we're having is really about talking to our Black children about race and resistance, is what I would call the theme. Really rooting my work in racial justice, equity work, as someone who's been doing this work for a long time. And so that's my frame. It's always about race and resistance. And so we'll begin. All right, so this is how we will spend our time together. We're going to ground a little bit together. I'm going to share a little bit about Parenting for Liberation's history, how it became to be. We're going to do some context setting about this current moment. I'm going to share some tips that have been that I've cultivated by talking to so many other Black parents from my own lived experiences, and also from the podcast that I host. So I'm going to utilize all those experiences and all the stories of multiple Black parents to share some of the tips that I've learned about how to have these conversations with your children. I'm going to share some stories and some examples that you can try that are from the book. We're going to have a Q&A where I really hope that, questions and things that are percolating for you can come up. And then we'll close with some commitments. What are our commitments to raising children who are liberated? What are our commitments to having these conversations with our children? So that's how we'll spend our time together. And just a little bit about me. So Danielle asked me how to introduce me, and I'm like, I'm a Black mama. So I'm a Black mom. I'm raising two children. I have a 16-year-old, 11-year-old. I'm raising them in the suburbs and outside of Los Angeles, in Orange County, but I'm from Compton. Me and someone else on this call, I was excited to find out. And I've done all of my work in social justice. And so I think about liberation as a practice and a way of being, and also a destination. And how do I do that in service of my children? How do I do that in service of my children's liberation? I'm the founder of Parenting for Liberation. I'm a podcast host, and I'm a new author, which is a new thing that I add to my bio that is kind of new and scary, but exciting. And I actually have my copy of my book right here. So I'm excited about my new baby, my book baby that's coming out soon. So this is me, and these are my kiddos, them at different actions, and us in our really trying to center our African identity in their lives to make them really think about what does it mean to be Black beyond the US definition of Blackness. And so that's what we're up to, and that's what I do with them. So I just felt like you should know who you're talking to, as you're in these conversations. I just want to bring myself in. And so first, before I begin any of my sessions, I always like to ground. And really what that means is just really becoming present, right? As moms, we're always like running from meeting to meeting, or we're running around like our kids. Like we just are always like, we're doing everything. Some people say we're super women or we're superheroes because we can multitask. And so in this moment, whenever I host a session, I invite folks to ground, which is really slowing down and being present with what is. So I'm going to invite folks to ground with me. I know I need it because I was on a 6-hour Zoom call today. So I'm going to invite myself to ground. So I invite folks to put your feet on the floor, however that is. Feel your body. Feel your body. Feel the weight of your body being held. If you're sitting in a chair, lean back. Lean back into that chair. What does it feel like to be held? We're so used to carrying everything, carrying all the weight, doing everything for our family. So let's just feel what it feels like to be held and cradled by the chair or the bed or wherever you are, feeling your feet on the ground. And I really want to invite us to focus on our breath. So really just taking some time to slow down and breathe deep, breathe low and slow. Focusing on our breath right now is a political and revolutionary act in this moment. We talk so much right now about our breath, from COVID-19, which is a respiratory issue, an illness, to George Floyd's breath being pulled from his body. Breath is a political act. Our ability to breathe is a political act. So I invite us to breathe. Breathe low and slow. We breathe to feel alive. We breathe to return to the moment. We breathe so that we remember that we are alive and we have breath. Breath is life. So I want us to breathe. Let's take a few inhales together. Inhale and exhale. It's also important to give our breath sound. So I'm going to inhale and I'm going to hum, because we need to vocalize our breath, that our breath has voice. Yes? So this is a practice that I often return to. And I invite you to return to this practice as we go through this conversation, as things get kicked up, as maybe your feelings or emotions or anxiety or stresses may be called or triggered in this moment, in this call, or even in this political moment, that you always have the ability to return to your breath, to return to your body. Yes? So this is a practice that I invite you all into. And I also like to open any space that I'm facilitating or holding as a Black mom who's in service of Black liberation, to always ground in the lives of those who have been taken by white supremacy or state-sanctioned violence. And so as I do this, I want to continue to remind you to breathe, right? As I say their name, continue to breathe and stay grounded. So I want to say Breonna Taylor. Say her name, Breonna Taylor. Even though I can't hear you you're muted, I want to invite us to say her name, to call her name, to remind us of her life that she has lived. Ahmaud Arbery, say his name. We honor the life of Ahmaud Arbery. George Floyd, say his name. We honor the life of George Floyd. And so many more who we've lost, from Tamir Rice to Mike Brown, Trayvon Martin, Ayanna Stanley Jones, Rekia Boyd. We say all their names because not only are Black men and women taken from us, so are our Black babies, and we honor them. And I know that when we say those names, that it does something to us. It trips up something in us, because I know it did for me. So I'm inviting folks to remember to stay grounded. And this is what saying those names did for me as I was raising my children, right? Saying their names and acknowledging their lives. Every time I see or hear the stories of racialized terror and violence in Black lives, it impacted my parenting. It made me parent from fear. And the image on the left side of your screen, I believe, if we're mirroring properly, is an image of the way that I was parenting. This is what seeing violence over and over again happen did to my parenting. And so this type of parenting, I call it parenting from fear. Some people would say like, oh, it's protective. It's protecting our children from violence and harm. But what I realized in my own parenting is that it was actually limiting my child's ability. It was restricting his ability to be free. It was stifling his growth, because I thought I was protecting him, but what I was doing was limiting him, limiting his ability, limiting his range, limiting his growth. And so I invite us to think about, and this is what I was thinking about as I developed this organization, is that parenting from fear was actually harmful. It was about harm reduction. I was trying to prevent him from being impacted by violence, but what I was doing was causing harm. I was trying to protect him from the police, but I was acting like the police in my own home by minimizing, limiting, and restricting his growth. And so what I shifted to was this idea of parenting for liberation. So you'll see the image on the right where it's uplifting him, uplifting his agency, his power, his voice, uplifting his ability to be free. And in that transition, I did a lot of my own researching and learning. And so I share those learnings with other parents. And that's kind of how I started the organization Parenting for Liberation. And so Parenting for Liberation is an organization that really is about supporting a world. Our vision is for a world where Black children are raised for liberation rather than fear, and a community of Black parents. And so I really appreciate being a part of this community of Black moms. And our mission is to support Black parents who are doing the healing work, healing from historical and ongoing trauma, interrupting intergenerational violence, and building resilient and joyful Black families in community. And we do that with 3 approaches. We do healing. So I do a lot of healing circles, which is why here we are breathing. You're like, what? We're supposed to be doing a workshop. You got to sit here breathing and all this. That's a part of the work that we do at Parenting for Liberation. We do healing circles. We support folks. We just did a grief circle on Sunday where we got together to grieve the lives of those who I just shared on the previous screens and so many more. And it's so important for us as Black folks to get together and practice ways of self-love and healing together. And we really root that work in the work of Dr. Joy DeGruy, who does work around post-traumatic slave syndrome. And then our second work, I see Danielle likes that. That's your jam, huh? The second body of work that we do is around learning new parenting approaches that are rooted in liberation. And again, that's learning that has been done with and so many other Black parents. That learning is what is in this book. It's not just Trina's ideas in here. It's Trina's conversations and learnings from over 20 other Black parents who have informed this book. Parents who I witnessed who are raising liberated, free children. And so that learning is something that we do collectively. We collectively learn practices and strategies. And so that's what I've been cultivating and curating these learnings. And then we do it in community. I really believe in the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. And so how do we build communities of practice, communities of parents who are really intentional about raising our children to be liberated and free? And what does that really look like in practice? And so that's the work of Parenting for Liberation. And all of our work is grounded in this quote. Audre Lorde said that to raise Black children in the mouth of a racist, sexist, suicidal dragon, AKA the United States of America, it is perilous and chancy that if they cannot love and resist, they probably will not survive. And that quote has grounded my work and our work since its inception, because it really is about those 2 pieces. Our children must love and resist. Yes. And I think when Danielle introduced, she said, how do we raise our children to understand race without it withering away or chipping away at their sense of self? And so that's why this work is rooted in the idea of love and resistance. And so when I say love, it's like love on our children so much that they know their value, their power, their strength, their beauty, their resilience as Black people. Remind them of their legacy, remind them of their resilience, their power, remind them of their ancestors, right? Have them fall so much in love with being Black that nothing nobody tells them can make them doubt themselves, right? Make them love their hair, love their skin, love their loudness, love every single quirk about themselves, right? So you affirm them, we love on them so hard. And that is the thing that protects them. Love is what can protect them, not keeping them in the house and not talking to nobody and doing all that, right? And then the second part is resistance. So you're like, oh, I'm going to teach my child to resist, then they're going to resist me. Maybe, because I definitely experienced that. But I do think it's so important for us to teach our children to resist. And what they're resisting is any and everything that tries to limit their humanity. Resist any and everything such as racism, capitalism, law enforcement, media messages, anything that tries to tell them that they are not worthy, that they are less than, that they resist that they automatically be like, no, that's not the truth. I know my worth, I know my value, I know my power. And so that really is the driver of the work that I do in Parenting for Liberation, is that we teach our children to love and resist. And that is so essential to their ability to not only survive, but to thrive. And so I honor Audre Lorde, who's a Black feminist, queer poet who's no longer with us, but whose work has informed so many Black feminists that I'm proud to be a part of that legacy. Yeah. Okay, so now we're up to the conversation. I just had to give you some context as to like how I do the work and why I do the work. So how to have these conversations about race with our children? Well, I mean, it really is that the first step, and I'll name all of these tips are from the book, from the podcast, and conversations with other parents. I like to frame that because I don't like to propose that I am the expert and know everything. Like, no, this is a shared learning that I'm sharing with you all. Okay, so the first step to talking to children about racism is first to take care of yourself. And I know that might be like, wait, what? I'm supposed to be talking to my kids. I should be taking care of them. But you cannot pour from an empty well. You cannot pour from an empty glass. You cannot have a conversation with your kid about race if you are stressed out, nervous, frantic, afraid, fearful. It's going to show up in the way that you talk to your children. So the way that we grounded in the beginning, I invite you to ground like that when your child's like, can we talk about that? If you're not ready to talk about it in that moment, say, give me a few moments, or ask for some space to pause. Really inviting folks to ground, whether that's breathing or dancing or whatever you need to do to get yourself together. And I don't mean it to be like you have to be perfectly polished and have the right answer for your children, but that you are just present to how you're feeling. Make sure you're not emotionally charged. Check in with your own self, your energy, how you're feeling. Because remember that kids will pick up on your energy. You could be saying one thing, like everything's okay, we're going to be great, but they could tell that you're nervous. They can hear the fear in your voice, right? So even though they can feel our emotional energy, right? They came from us some of them come from us, or they're with us all the time. So they read our energy. So remember that they pick up on that. So if you are not in the right mind state or emotional state to have the conversation, then wait. And also notice if you're nervous to talk about it, because they'll notice that too. If you keep avoiding it and be like, oh, we'll talk about that later. Oh no, you're too young to talk about that. They'll notice that you're not talking about it, and they'll make a note of that too. Like, oh, those are the kinds of things we don't talk about, right? And so you say a lot, even when you're saying nothing at all, they notice that. So it's important that you are ready to enter into the conversation, that you take the time to ground and be present to your own needs, and also check your own narrative, right? Like if you have like a very specific way that you feel about it, that might be biased or informed by your own fear or informed by your own, like be able to be present to what that is before you indoctrinate your children without having like the clarity and the pause. Yeah? Does that make sense? See, this is when I'd be like, yeah, y'all feel that? Y'all disagree? We'd be in a conversation, but here we are. Head nods are okay. So that's the first one. It's just to check in with yourself. That's the first step or tip that I would offer, and that I've heard from other parents. The second one is familiar. We just talked about it. It's about being rooted in love and resistance. And so just like the quote we talked about, as you start to engage in these conversations with your children about racism or race, ask yourself, as you're talking to your children, is the way you're doing it going to make them love themselves? Or are you going to make them afraid to be Black? If how you talk about it, going to tell them about the things they need to do or change about themselves so that it doesn't happen to them, that's not rooted in love. That's rooted in fear. So yeah, just ask yourself if what is the way that you're going to share this story or talk to them, is it rooted in love? And is it going to make them fall in love with being Black? Or is it going to be something that traumatizes them and scares them away from wanting to be Black? And the way that we do that is when we start to talk to our children about what they shouldn't do or how they should do something differently, we automatically make them being Black the problem, as opposed to the problem being that someone did something wrong or someone caused harm. And so that's the piece about resistance. And so I'll give an example. So when I was in fear-based parenting, Trayvon Martin was murdered wearing a hoodie. So I made up this rule about no hoodies. Oh, you can't wear a hoodie, it's not safe. And it wasn't even logical, because there's nothing about a hoodie that makes you unsafe, right? And so I told him that he couldn't, or I told him when Trayvon Martin was killed for playing with a toy gun, I eliminated toy guns or anything that's shaped like a gun, right? And what I was communicating to him was that Black boys cannot play and Black boys cannot wear hoodies. That them doing that is why they died. Instead of being able to help him understand at his age that it wasn't what they were doing that was wrong, that it was the violence that was enacted upon them that was the problem, right? And in doing that and naming where the real issue is not in the children's behavior or Black folks' behavior, they're just being Black. That it's not about changing that behavior. Really, it's about talking to my child about this is what the issue is and how can I teach my child that it's important to resist that, resist white supremacy or police violence or inequity or injustice, that I really be clear about what is the issue that we're talking about here. And I know that I did that as a way that I thought I was protecting my son. I made these rules and I thought that like, if he doesn't do these 3 things, he'll be safe. But every time something happened in the news, I would add another thing to the list of something that he couldn't do. Can't play, can't be outside, you can't go to the park, you can't play loud music with your friends in the car. Like every incident I was adding to the list, to where now it's just, Breonna Taylor was just in her house asleep. So I can't continue to blame the victim and say it was something that they did wrong, or try to scapegoat myself by saying, if I do these things, it'll keep my son safe or my children safe. And so I realized that I had to be very transparent and really get clear about the narrative that I was teaching my child, that it wasn't about anything about them that was the problem. It was about the systems and the institutions. And so I needed to teach him to love himself and also to resist, rather than trying to change himself to fit some box that is not even a realistic box that he can fit into. And so as you're doing this, make sure that your conversations with your child are rooted in love, Black love, love and Blackness, and resisting anything that gets in the way of it. And is that how you're holding the conversation about the murders of different folks? The next one is about having age-appropriate conversations. I will admit, as an activist parent, I was having these conversations with kids that were way over their heads. I was talking about oppression and racism and sex. I was just talking about, I was using all these words. And my son was like, why do you keep saying sex? All he could focus on was sex when I was talking about sexism. But it's like, that's what his brain was drawing to. And I realized, I was like, okay, I'm not having these conversations in age appropriate ways. And that's not to say that you don't have the conversation about race until they're old enough, because data shows that kids understand racial difference and they can assess that really early. They can understand your social cues about how you engage with certain people. They can assess that. They say like as early as 6 months, kids can see the distinctions. And as early as preschool, kids start noticing that there's differential treatment based on folks who have different color skin or different, they notice the difference, right? And that's why my child came home from school as early as kindergarten asking about like why the kids who have white skin, right? And so they know about it early. So we do need to talk to our children about it as early as possible. But again, reminding ourselves to talk about it in a way that makes them love themselves, that affirms them. And I would just note that there are so many expert, like folks who have like a list of books that are age appropriate, like these are the categories from this age, from preschool age to kindergarten to high school. So I'm just going to lift up some resources because I like to make sure that other folks know about other resources that are available. So resources such as Embracing Race or Raising Race Conscious Children definitely have a lot of tools about how to have these conversations, or here's some tools or resources for having the conversations in the different age brackets, because I definitely had them with 6-year-olds probably at a 21-year-old level, and I was just, it didn't work, right? So making sure that you enter into the conversation in the way that's appropriate for your child's age. And you do that by letting them lead the conversation. Like they'll tell you what their level, like when I talked to my child when he was younger about racism, I had to like connect to things that he could connect to, like making it relate to bullying. When I had to talk about equity and justice, I had to talk to him about it like from the realm of sharing, because kids know all about fairness and taking turns and being fair. And so they can understand that like, oh, this is not fair, that certain people are being impacted by certain laws at different levels, that is not fair, right? And so they could talk about equity and justice and equality and sense of fairness. And so there's some ways to have these conversations in age appropriate ways. And these folks have some great resources for the age appropriate different conversations. The other one is, the fourth one is one that's from a story in the book with a good friend. She's a professor of sociology. Her name's Tiffany Lanois. She's based in Los Angeles. And she talks about having these conversations often and regular. Like, don't wait till something like critical happens in the news, or we shouldn't wait till the right moment to talk about race or racism, that it's an everyday conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, and not in a way that it's like, oh my God, let's sit down and talk about race. It's not like that. She says she has these conversations when she's at a restaurant and she noticed like the labor and who works in the restaurant, who works in the kitchen, or she notices there's a mural at a Mexican restaurant that's like a mural about colonization in Latin America. And she's like, let's talk about that. What do you think that picture means, right? And so it's really about having these conversations often and regular. She does it every day with everyday things. They were driving down the street, and one of the stories she shared, they were driving down the street and her son noticed that in certain communities, when they drove down the street, there was more trash than in other communities on the ground. So she talked to them about like economics and capitalism and like taxation, and how certain communities have more resources because they have higher taxes on their property, right? And so really really thinking about the ways that we can have these everyday conversations with our kids, because they ask these questions all the time. We just have to be able to lean into them and not be afraid to engage them. Yeah. And then the fifth tip I would say is around having open communication. And this is a tool that's in the book as well. And really open is an acronym. And it was informed by a conversation I had with Maya Williams, who is one of the co-editors of this book, actually, Revolutionary Mothering. If you haven't seen this book, I recommend this as well. It's called Revolutionary Mothering, Love on the Front Lines. And one of the co-editors, Maya Williams, was in a conversation with me about how to have open talks and communication with her child. And so open stands for, the O stands for observing, to be observant of your child's demeanor, their energy, really trying to assess if they're ready to have a conversation, if they're approaching you about a conversation, observing their energy around it. Are they shutting down? Are they agitated? Are they nervous? And how do you pay attention to how they're showing up in the conversation? The P stands for praise. Too often, when you're parenting from fear or to protect, it's a lot of criticism and like, you shouldn't do it this way, do it that way. Why did you do that? Why is this happening again? And instead, how do we praise our children and honor the bravery or the strengths, or admire the courage for them to bring up these conversations, to want to talk about things that are really heavy? So how do we praise them and make them feel inspired and uplifted about these conversations or whatever they're sharing with us in their communication? The E is around emotions and empathy. How is it okay to be okay with their emotions and not try to tell them like, don't cry, no, don't try to shut down their emotions? Or if they're angry, like, allow them to be angry. It's okay to be upset. How do you allow and open their emotions? Too often little boys are told that they shouldn't cry. And as Black girls, too often we're told that we're too loud, too bold, too strong, too rah-rah. As Black women, Black girls, we've all heard of the angry Black woman trope. And so like Black girls are not allowed to like have a full range of emotions, and Black boys are often told that they can't have a full range of emotions because they're boys. And so how do we open up and allow them to have as much emotional range as possible and to be okay with it, even if it makes us uncomfortable? How do we affirm their emotions? And then also, how do we empathize with them and say, you know what, I'm scared too. Mommy's scared, mama is scared. I'm angry as well. I'm angry as hell, right? Like, how do we also show up and share our emotions? I know growing up, I did not get a lot of emotions. Like, I never saw my mother really cry. I didn't see her afraid. You know, she was just always strong Black woman, right? And so how do we also honor our own emotions and share our emotions with our children in a way that does not overwhelm them? Like, we shouldn't be overly scared. And then it makes them be scared. But how do we empathize and show our own emotions and give ourselves access to how we're feeling as a way of connecting with our children? So that is what the E is for in open. And then the N in open is around non-judgmental and non-directive. So if we're having an open conversation about this, we're not trying to judge how they show up or what they say or what they think. We're just trying to sit with it and be open to it. And we're not trying to direct the conversation. Like, we're not lecturing them. We're not telling them, well, this is what I think you should do, or this is what I would do. You know, we're actually just being with what our children are sharing. And if they're sharing, because lately my child has been sharing some things that are very interesting, like TikTok videos, and I'm just like, oh, this is so interesting. How do I just be with what they're up to and the conversations out there, and without judging them or criticizing them or trying to direct them to talk about what we want them to talk about? And so that is the 5 tips that I could offer. And I feel like I've talked a lot. So I want to turn to the chat and also see if we can, let's see, I'm trying to see the chat while I'm also facilitating. But I'm curious, this is the reflection question that I would invite folks into, whether it be in the chat or also online, like if you want to verbalize. I think there's a way for them, like for folks to unmute you. Which of the tips feel useful to you as you would talk to your children about race or racism in this moment? And the E was empathy, emotions and empathy for Marion. Which of these tips, if any, feel useful to you as you would talk to your child about racism? Oh, people want to see inside the book. Yes, I can definitely show you inside the book.
So Trina, it may be helpful if you stop sharing unless you have other slides that you need to share with us.
I can pause.
Great, thank you.
Did it stop for you all, or is it still up?
It's still up for us. And yes, Linda, you can unmute. Feel free to unmute your line. If you're having difficulty, I can unmute you.
I got it. Hi.
Great.
Hello.
Can you do speaker view so I can see?
Yes, I'm going to switch it now.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You can begin talking.
Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very useful. I wasn't sure until the other night that I needed to have this conversation because I thought that my husband and I were doing a pretty good job. Then I realized that my youngest daughter said, "Oh no, she doesn't have any problems with race." And I'm like, "What? Wait a second. Wait a minute. Are you sure?" So thank you for that. Some things resonated with me, like being, like I think I probably didn't talk too much about it because I don't want to scare them, right? I don't want them to look at their friends differently and assume that their friends are racist because they're not Black. And so I probably held back on sharing things with them. But when my youngest said that she had no issues and no one has ever treated her badly and she didn't have any of those experience any microaggressions at all, and she goes to a predominantly white school, I'm like, really? Okay. And so we had to have a conversation about what some of those things may look like and how to address it when she does. And then you mentioned your mom. My mom is from the South and experienced a lot of racism. She was part of desegregations of schools. She picked cotton, and she would not talk to me at all about it, right? And then she was also very withdrawn. She didn't share I hardly ever saw her crying. And if I cried, it was like, "What are you crying about? Stop crying." So that emotional bond, we just didn't share. So those were the things that resonated with me from your discussion. And I thank you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely resonate with the, what are you crying for? And that's why I'm always like, how do we assess our own feelings as adults? Sometimes, even as adults, what I've learned is that I have to go back and try to reparent my own inner child with a liberated frame, because I was not parented in this frame. And so the book, someone asked about the book, it's broken down into 3 sections, right? So section 1 is about reconnecting to ourselves, to our own inner child. And so this whole section is stories from different parents who talk about, like, as a Black woman, like never hearing her mom tell her, "I love her, I love you," right? Never hearing those words, and then making a commitment to love so much on her children that they know that they're loved, that they feel it, they hear it, they see it, they feel it all the time, as a liberated act, right? Because that is so important. And so that is the healing of our own inner child, is this first section. And then the second section, I think I skipped it. The second section is a reconnection to our children. And so that section is filled with stories about how do we practice liberation with our children. So these are stories from parents who talk about, like, in our house, we don't have family rules. We actually have agreements and how we practice creating a culture in our home where we all are accountable to each other, not just do what I said because I told you, but we've in agreement as a family, like this is how we want to be together. And so we all are in agreement that not only do the children have to follow the agreements, but so do the parents. And then the third section is called Reconnection to Our Community. And those are all stories about the different ways that as Black folks, we build communities, that we have expansive ideas of family, that it's not about only like biological children and biological parents, that it's about raising our children in a village. And what does that village look like, and how can we grow that village? It's also about building our own parenting community. So like this Mocha community is definitely like a parenting community that you can come to with folks that you know who have like similar like frames or similar entry or entrance that you have. So trying to build communities that are like-minded. That section also looks at liberated schools, looking at movement communities, like how do you have your children participate in movement spaces, whether that be going to protests or rallies and things of that nature. And so that's the one about how do you build a community with families. And each story in the book has a tool attached to it. And I actually can show you some of the tools when we go back to the slides, but I wanted to invite other folks if they wanted to share.
So Trina, we actually have a question coming from our YouTube audience. And this
Wait,
is from
and
Shay.
LaShawn, Diara has had her hand raised for a minute.
Okay, let me
Here
go ahead
on
and get through this
Zoom.
question because it came in a while ago. So
Okay.
it's a Shaw Madison. How do you discuss it without them feeling differently about themselves?
Yeah, I think it's about if my child does feel different, I want them to feel the difference is that they feel so much love and appreciation and admiration for themselves as Black folks. Really in doing it in a way that makes them love themselves, right? Like, do you see your hair? Do you see your skin? That melanin is popping. Your curls are so beautiful and lush, you know, like having it be something that they can celebrate about themselves. It's not like, I think everyone is different. And I think that we should acknowledge that, like, we are different. Everyone is different. Even in our families, our shades are different. Our hues are different. Being different is not, I don't see that as a challenge. I think that is how we are all created. And so how do we honor and celebrate difference? And in that difference, love ourselves. And so, you know, there's songs that I would play that are like, I love being Black or brown skin girl, right? All of that stuff is about how do we get them to see it as something to be prideful, to really see themselves. Because, you know, media messages might not show that. So how do we cultivate that in our homes really early?
Great, thank you. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, LaShawn. Diara, your hand was raised.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for this time. And I appreciate it being at 9 o'clock where everybody is asleep so I could actually focus. So I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, and, you know, pretty much everything in this house is centered around the beautiful Blackness that they are, between, you know, the books that they read and the shows that they watch and the discussions that we have. But so it's never really been like a conversation about race. However, you know, given what's happening in the world right now, and it's, you know, trying to shield, so to speak, I appreciated your commentary on that about the do this, don't do that. But right now, they're still so worried about COVID that having this conversation that's a little bit deeper, because their friends, you know, are talking about it, because their friends' parents are talking about it, and we're getting a lot of, are you okay from our other friends, and asking about, are the kids okay, and that type of thing. So it's trying to figure out how to bring this up with them when they're already anxious about what's happening, of why they can't go outside and see their friends. So I was just curious if, you know, you had any commentary on that, or if anybody is dealing with this same thing in their homes.
Yeah, oh yes, my kid is definitely COVID nervous. And like, even thinking about COVID and how it's impacting the Black community at alarming and disproportionate rates, or desperate rates, that it's a real thing that, you know, we have anxiety around, right? And so my child is not so much in like wanting to talk about what's happening. Like we haven't talked about the George Floyd death or Breonna Taylor. Like, he knows the work that I do, but I'm not sitting there and like, okay, let me tell you a story that another Black, I'm not doing that. If they aren't coming to me to talk about it, like, I feel like Black children also have a right to just be free, to just play, to just be children, right? That they don't have to always, like, it's unfortunate that we have to have these conversations with our children. So I really am like, it's great that our non-Black peers, our mothers, are actually having these conversations with their children, like they should. And if our children aren't having these conversations right now, it's okay. There is so much already things to be worried about, right? I did take my son to a protest, and he was just kind of like, but is this safe because of COVID, you know? So we had to have all these rules about how far we stood away and where were we, or do we stay in our cars? And I wanted to validate that fear and that worry about COVID. And so how do I honor his worries and concerns and not force him to talk about another Black death? Like, let's allow them also to be children, and to play, and to just play video games or whatever they need to do, to stay sane in a moment of like, there's already so much going on in the world, you know? So I support your decision. Like, you're not forcing them to sit down and have that talk if they're not bringing it up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Tiffany, you have a raised hand.
Hi, Trina. Let me lower my hand. So my question just relates right off of what you just said about not forcing them. I just recently took my 13-year-old daughter to a protest with me nearby in our town, and she didn't talk. And I asked her, did she understand what was happening? And she kept telling me yes. But for some reason, deep down, I didn't believe her. I think she was just yesing me to make me be quiet. But I said, do you know why we're here? Do you know why we're saying this? Do you know why people are raising their right fist in the air? Do you know why we're saying the victims' names? And everything she replied to me was like, yes, as if she just, like, she didn't want me to lecture to her, but I felt like I had to keep talking to force the conversation with her. So I don't know if it's the tween stage, like you mentioned before, the right age and the age appropriate conversation. I want to force these conversations on her because I feel like, the kids are not watching as much news as we are. They're on their TikTok, they're on their YouTube videos. So I wanted to make sure she understood. However, I didn't want to feed it down her throat and force her. How do you balance that to say, like, you feel like that they should know, but they somehow give us a little bit of a resistance to sharing knowledge with them?
Oh my goodness. I have a tween and I have a teen. My tween is in that moment of like, I don't want to talk about it. I just want to be on TikTok. And like, yes, I know what you're talking about. Move on. I think that definitely is like developmentally age rate, like the place in their age and their development around like the tween and teen stages where they start to individualize and like step away from parents and start to have build their own identity and their own friend group, right? So there is a lot of like, they don't want to hear from us. For my son, who is entering the tween stage, we had a similar thing where I was like, I need you to know this because right now folks are out in the streets on, marching for these reasons. I need you to know this, right? And someone told me, another friend who's like a brilliant Black mama, reminded me that like, if we plant the seeds, that over time it will be watered. Like we can't plant the seeds and water it and expect it to harvest like right now, that like over time, those seeds that we're planting will be watered. Like I'm imagining, maybe in his future, he'll be 20, 21 or something. And he'll be like, he'll be ready to like put his fist in the air too. Like those seeds are being watered and nurtured. Also, I just invite him into conversations like, how are you feeling about all of this? And like literally wait for him to like take his time to tell me, right? Like getting in tune with how they're feeling, what's coming up for them, instead of like trying to lecture them, like understanding understanding how they see this moment. And my teen, who's 16, would come to me. Like she came to me at one point and told me that she had watched the video, for example, of Philando Castillo. I hadn't even watched it because I refused to watch it. And she's like, oh, someone at my school sent it to me, or I saw it on YouTube, or she saw it on some app. And so then it was like that conversation came to her and it forced me into that conversation. So I also feel like those moments may also happen, especially with their own, ability to kind of access information in their own way. And the other thing I would just name is like, sometimes they're already having the conversation with their friends in their peer group, because again, they want to individuate from their parents and have their own like youthful identity. And so you might be like, what are your friends saying about this? And that might be an entry point to talking about it. But I definitely feel you. I took my son and he was not into it, but he was there.
Trina, are you ready for another question?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Great. We have another question that is asking about how do we teach our young people to stand up for what they believe?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what Tiffany just shared is definitely an example, like taking them to protest, asking them what would they like to do. Like sometimes, like my son right now, he doesn't want to go out because of COVID, but he definitely is like, we were planning this caravan to the like mayor's mansion. And we were like gonna drive around and like honk our horns, and like it was gonna be just a caravan of like all these parents and their children, because we can't get out our cars, but we still make a message and have a stand, right? So what are the ways that your child can do it in their way? If they want to have a message, like really supporting them on that. Well, what is the issue that you see? What are the problems you see in our community? And then ask them, what are the solutions? What are the solutions they see? Because right now in all over, the movement is shifting to this idea, this activist call right now is the demand to defund the police. And so for young people, we're like, if we defunded the police in your schools, what would you want instead? What should we use some of the, if we divert some resources from policing, what would you want to invest those resources into, right? And having young people decide and name some of those causes, right? So I really support young people being involved. When you think about the protests of the past, you think about the civil rights movement, young people were always at the helm. SNCC, the students, students have always organized. That's where I first started organizing, was in college. So like young people throughout the nation, if you look at some of these big movements and protests, we had a big protest in Oakland here in California. It was organized by 2 high schoolers, right? I think that I just saw a news piece that came out that one of the big marches in, I think it was Nashville, was organized by 2 Black girls, teenagers, right? So young people are the drivers of change. And so I would say, how do you support them, connect them to organizations? How do you connect them to other organizers, whether that be to the Black Lives Matter network or, just different networks? I really like the work that BYP 100, which stands for Black Youth Project 100. It's a young people led organization, and they've been doing incredible work throughout the country. And so just how do you connect them to some of those resources so that they have the support, that they don't feel like they're the only one in their community who's doing it?
Here's another one. How do we teach our young people to love America when America has not always loved us?
Oh my G.
Yep.
Oh my goodness, that's a hard one. That is a hard one, because I definitely am going to celebrate Juneteenth, and I ain't really that much about celebrating July 4th, right? Like, how do we hold? I think, how do we help them understand America's context across countries, right? Like, how do we understand America within the global context? How do we understand America and also understand our many of us African ancestry, and also see that as a connection as home? I really struggle with that. It's hard to love America when America doesn't love us, but also be aware that this is where we are and this is home for many of us. And how do we push America to be great, as it's been saying? Actually, how do we push it to actually live its values of liberty and justice for all? I think it's really about America as it is not in service of Black people. It wasn't created for us, right? And so how do we continue to push it? If this is where we are, how do we continue to push it? Whether that be activism or changing systems. I think if it's broken, you fix it. It's hard to love something that's broken without saying, I love it so much, I'm going to fix it. That's the way I can love America, is by trying to fix it.
Great, thank you. How do we help out and you've alluded to this when it comes to us, but I'm hoping we can expand that a little bit. How do we help our children cope with the loss of freedom, safety, privilege, and life that is attached to racism? So when those restrictions are coming, not from us, but from outside of our homes.
Help me understand the question again, Danya. Or how do you understand it? Can you phrase
it? How do we help our children? So how do we help them? So to some extent, some might say that there is a loss of freedom, safety, privilege, and life that is attached to racism, even if we aren't teaching them that at home. So the way this sometimes shows up, and I don't know if this is what the person was asking, but sometimes we see this show up in school. Oftentimes, I would say we see it show up in school and what they're given at school, how they're treated in school.
Yeah, I mean, that's that love and resistance piece again. My child was being homeschooled, in this moment of COVID, and I was more privy and more accessible to the learning and the teachings, right? They send me the packet, they send me the work, I'm listening, I'm overhearing the conversations that he's having with his teachers on Zoom or his Google Hangout, and I'm immediately interrupting some of the narrative. He's in 5th grade, so it's all about the US history and the founding fathers, right? So there's a lot of interrupting that I do. There's a whole section, a couple of stories in here that are about liberating schools, liberating education. It's a letter in here that I send to his teacher every year at the beginning of school, because we live in a community where he is probably going to have a non-Black teacher, predominantly a white teacher in a school with a lot of other non-Black kids or white kids. And so I send this letter to his school, and I I do a lot of work. I feel like I'm a teacher's assistant or something at the school because I'm doing a lot of work to work with the school to make sure that their curriculum is culturally relevant, to make sure that their curriculum is not like anti-Black, to make sure that their curriculum is not anti-Indigenous, that they talk about Native American history, right? So I'm doing a lot of that work, unfortunately. And so I've been asking people, like, as you develop your liberated schools, let me know where they are so I can send my children, because I am not a teacher and I don't have the energy to be like pushing white institutions. But yeah, that is the work of love and resistance, that my son can now be in class, and when he hears information that's like, really, we're talking about the founding fathers and they're so great, but he's like, excuse me, but didn't they own slaves? You know, like, they're not that great. Weren't they a little right? Like, he can ask those questions, right? How do we teach cultivate that critical thinking skill in our children and allow them to challenge systems? Similarly, my daughter is also doing that work in her school, and she joined the BSU and sees herself as a feminist. And so how do we kind of cultivate that spirit of like, that spirit of Shirley Chisholm that says, if they don't give you a seat at the table, you bring your own folding chair. And now you just dismantle the table, right, and create your own table. So how do we instill that spirit in our children early on?
Great, thank you. I'm handing it over to LaShawn and you too.
All right, great, Trina. We have a question from GB. There's actually quite a bit of dialogue going on YouTube. So I'll get to some of that in a moment. But the question from GB is, are there any books or resources that you would recommend on race for children as young as 5?
Yeah. Oh, I'll send the list to the Mocha Moms team, and they can email it. But there are incredible list of books for talking to race. There's like an anti-racist baby book that's coming out soon, and there's so many resources, and I don't actually know them off the top of my head, but definitely there's so many books and resources. There's that 1,000 books about Black girls. Like, there's so many books that you could do, and I would say for Black children, I am more so interested, and my child has helped me understand that I'm more so interested in sharing books with him where it's not about being Black, but the characters happen to be Black, right? Like, they just see Blackness as like, it's a normal character. He's a superhero. He just so happens to be Black, as opposed to it being about this kid is a Black kid and here's his story about being Black, if that makes any sense. And so I'm really trying to make sure that we also have those kind of books that just have Black main characters so that they see themselves in books.
Right. I'm just going to give a few more comments here from YouTube, and then I'll toss it back to you, Danye. Nasadla says, I agree with letting children lead the conversation. I don't want to break the innocence of their childhood. Laurentine Brazil says, my daughter feels unsafe. She thought we would be harmed while protesting. She thinks 45 will bring back slavery. I just keep telling her there is no way any of us will allow that to happen. And then another comment from Jibri says, not quite, because my daughter is only 5, but I will use Juneteenth and the days before as an opportunity to educate her on the basic race level. Someone else says, at the same time, my daughter is 4 years old, or my son is 4 years old. He has sat next to me watching the news and asking questions about what he's watching. So kids, I think, are being bombarded and inundated with all of this. And it's an incumbent upon us as their first educators to be there to explain.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also, like, again, that first piece is about ourselves, like taking care of ourselves. Like, are we being inundated? Are we watching news all day? I definitely know that when my son goes to visit his grandpa, he definitely is like, oh my gosh, my grandpa watches Donald Trump and the speeches. Like, he's always watching the news, and then he just gets so angry. He's like, my grandpa gets all riled up when he's watching it. And I was like, just tell him to turn it off, like say, hey, maybe we should turn it off. So it's also like ability for us to step away, because if our kids are feeling it, we're also feeling it too, but we might not just be in touch with our feelings as much because we haven't been told to actually like check into our feelings about that. I have more slides if you want. I can actually share a story from the book, an example of a tool from the book, if that feels helpful. It's a story that is from years ago, but it was a story of a parent who had to talk to her child about police violence because it happened really close to their home. So are we ready to shift back to that? If so, I'll share my screen again. Let's see. Okay, so in the book, again, I told you it's all these stories from other parents. And so this one is called No More Police. And so this is actually the person's Facebook post about the story in the book. So after the murder of a 14-year-old named Jesse Romero by an LA Police Department officer in 2016, it was just down the block from their home. Her son, who was in first grade, asked her like, what's happening, right? There was like, you know, there were helicopters. And so she had a conversation that the police had hurt someone. And he's like, why? He's like, well, they hurt him. The young boy, he's 14, I think he was doing graffiti on the wall, right? And instead of being like, well, why, you know, well, he was doing graffiti, he was bad, it's his fault. They didn't get into that conversation, right? They got into, how does he feel? What did he feel like? What did he feel was the problem? And what did he feel like was the solution? Yeah. And so here is what the reflection in the book was. It invites folks to, it tells the story that Cecilia did with her child, and then it invites folks into reflection and able to practice or explore it, right? So the reflection is, Cecilia explored alternatives policing, right? And even right now, in this moment, this was 2016, even right now in this moment, we're talking about the movement is talking about defunding the police and maybe police abolition. And so she talked to her son about what are some alternatives. So the invitation for folks who will be reading the book would be to invite your children into a visioning exercise, to envision what is possible instead of police violence and surveillance. And so she asked her son, what do you believe was the problem? And so again, like young people wanting to actually be able to tell you what they think and not be lectured by us. It invites you to actually understand how they understand the content. And then what do you think is a way to solve the problem? And so that also gets young people to start to think about that they actually have power or agency to influence change early on. This is her conversation with a 6-year-old. So again, these can happen really early, but it's rooted in that there's an ability to make changes, right? That it doesn't have to stay the same. So that was a part of the reflection. So the practice for folks who have the book would be similar to Cecilia. You can invite your child to make a statement. So what happened was she asked her son, if you could say something to the police who are violent, what would you say? Right? And she's like, what would you say? And he's 6. He's like, grab a piece of paper. I want to write a letter to the police. And she's like, okay. And so she like opened up a Google Doc because, you know, she didn't have a piece of paper. She opened up a Google Doc and he began to tell her what he wanted to say. And I think that's on the first page. I'm gonna go back to it because this is what he said. He said, no more cops. We don't need you, but we need to talk to you. Stop arresting, stop killing, and stop shooting. You need to apologize. Drop your weapons to the trash can and never kill people again. We need to destroy the police station and make it something else, whatever we want, like a space center, a dinosaur center, or science potions. They cannot keep their stations. Police, never do that again. And then they she was like, okay, we'll mail it to the police station. It was a whole activity and exercise that she did with her son. And it was really about him being able to envision like that if they cause harm, what can we do instead? And he's a 6-year-old, so it's not a conversation about like what is prison abolition and all of that kind of stuff, those more politicized conversations. But it does help us to begin to have our children be invited into the conversation about what are alternatives. So again, like when we said, how do you talk to your kid about love in America when American doesn't love you, right? That conversation is like, well, what are some alternatives? What do you see as the problem and what do you see as the solution? And that our young people have the ability and agency to come up with those solutions. And so that's an example of one of the stories that I've heard and been in partnership with other parents who are raising Black kids, and Cecilia identifies as Afro-Latina, so raising mixed race Black children to practice liberation in their own thinking, in their own visions of the world, that young people have the visions. So that was just an example that I wanted to share. I'm happy to open it back up to questions if there's any that are coming up for you.
There is another question, and in a very practical sense, how do we strike that balance of teaching our children to be able to turn to the police for safety, and of course they also have to be a certain way with police? I'm trying to paraphrase the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's something that we struggle with, and I think it's the narrative that people are talking about, like all police aren't bad police and things of that nature. I really think it's about what we're realizing in this moment is that we have over-resourced policing as a means to solve so many other human issues, whether like If you have a homeless issue, you call the police. If you're having a domestic violence disturbance, you call the police. If you lose your cat up the tree, right? Like, it's like we've given them all the human issues. And so like the question is really getting at, like, is the police really the solution that you need? Is it really a mental health person? Is it really a therapist? Is it really a domestic violence support person? Is it really, like, actually us as a community really thinking about what are the social services that we're actually relying on police to do? And when do we really actually need the police? And what are the alternatives is what folks are exploring right now. And so I think if you could come up with a list for your family, for your community, like, actually, what are the things that you might need that might not come in a police officer's uniform, that there are other social services that you might need. And so, like, instead of just like 911, like, maybe it's the mental health services, maybe it's, these other kind of departments that we have in our communities that are resources. And I know a lot of communities are starting to think about alternatives to policing because of that reason, that like police don't necessarily often serve us, or like people are impacted by police in ways that are harmful. So I think it's about what are some of those alternatives, and working with our young people and working with our community organizers who are thinking about that and proposing alternatives.
So I have a question for you, Trina. Unless there, what for you in this time has been most difficult as a mother, as we watch what's going on around us right now?
Man, I think a lot of the questions that folks have raised, I've struggled with. Tiffany's question about my child not being interested in activism in this moment when I am like ride or die, breathe, eat, sweat, advocacy and activism. So when he's not interested, I'm like, I really struggle with like not getting in my own feelings about like, you need to know this. This is your history. This is history in the making. This is a legacy, right? That is what I struggle with. As you can tell, I'm all like getting all fast talking. I also think we struggle with isolating at home. We're definitely communal people. I definitely parent in a village. I co-parent with multiple people. I'm in a blended family. And I think the loss of those connections because of us still sheltering because of the pandemic, I think that has been a huge loss for our children, for myself. Him not being able to interact with his grandparents or with his friends or his cousins, like those relationships being binded right now have been really hard because it's literally me and him. And after a while, you and your tweens or your teens, y'all love each other. But after a while, 3 months of it just being you two, I love you, but I need some space, So, so I think those have been the things that have been the most challenging in this moment of both COVID and the racial uprising that's happening in the world. Thanks for asking.
Marion Williams has a question, and I'm not sure that I understand it. So Marion, if you are up for it, I'm going to encourage you to unmute yourself and ask it, in case I mess this up. But it says, isn't there a psychological danger to support kids in a way with the statement of somehow not loving America because America hasn't loved me? Marion, can you say more about that?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
yes, I was piggybacking on the question or statement that someone had asked earlier about, I don't know whether a child said it or if it was just something that was probably thought of, but I'm feeling like there's just a huge danger of even making that statement. I can't even imagine a child hearing that and then thinking like, and I have to live here? I mean, I just think like there's got to be some kind of adjustment to that kind of statement where the child gets to understand like we have a ton load of issues going on, but and we know it's been 401 years. We know all that as adults, but from the mind of a child, I mean, I can't imagine them thinking like that America in general, like everybody, because kids are thinking people, right? And so I don't know. I think that there needs to be some kind of way to make sure that kids are not thinking that everybody is you know, because then what does that say to them? Like, well, why are we here? Why don't we just go to some other country? I mean, you know, there has to be some kind of, I don't know. That's why I'm saying it feels to me that that would be like me, like saying all white people are bad and then putting my kid in an all white school. I mean, you know, in a similar thought. So that's why I'm asking the question of, isn't there a psychological, or couldn't there be a psychological damage with like even entertaining that as a, you know, a statement of fact? And it's complicated because we have 401 years of, you know, fact, but, you know, how do we find some kind of way to break that down a little bit so that it's more digestible and can be lived with as a child? As adults, we know how to handle that, but from a child, I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, thank you, Marian, for elaborating on the question. I think there's, you know, this is definitely a multifaceted question. You know, it's complex. I will say that the conversation, like I have had conversations, right? Like 2019 was the year of the return. I did go back home to Ghana. And we have been in those conversations about when you talk about home, if you talk to your children about our origin story and how we arrived here, right? That this and where we come from, right? That is a trajectory, and in our experience here in this country has not been an experience of love and acceptance and appreciation and gratitude. That just hasn't been our experience. And so I do try to have those conversations in ways that are not, that are honest and authentic and transparent, but not in a way that tries to cause harm. And so again, I try to root all those conversations in that grounding quote around love and resistance. That, you know, if some like that the work is around resistance. If we're going to stay here in this country, right, we're going to live here, then we identify where there are flaws and challenges in this country. And when I say America, I don't mean people. I don't mean Americans. I mean America. It's an institution. It's a system. It's, you know, it's the political system. It's the capitalist system. It's the economic system. It's the voting system. Like, it's a system. It's institutions, right? This isn't about individual people. Just like white supremacy isn't about individual people. It's a culture. It's systemic. It's in the institution. So I try as much as I can to talk to my children about it in that way, but literally I'm like drawing circles of like, see, and then this is connected to this, and look at the root causes. And so, you know, it is definitely like, how do you have this conversation in an age appropriate way? But I do often try to let my children know, like, you know, I have an Africa tattoo on my heart, right on my chest. Like, I want them to know that beyond America, that there is also a place that we can call home as well. And so, you know, I definitely hear your concern about not trying to harm or create psychological harm for our children. And I don't equate psychological harm with being truthful about the conditions of our country, but how to do it in a way that's age appropriate is important.
Great, thank you. So we are coming up on time, Trina. And before we do, I want to make sure that there are no additional questions here in the chat room. We do recognize that there may be a ton of other questions. One last one from Lakeisha. Hi, Lakeisha. If we are asking young people to be themselves, how do we support them through the reality of code switching, especially at school?
Ooh.
We have talked about code switching, but you're going to have to talk about it in 2 minutes or less.
Okay, code switching. Geez. I feel like there's a revolution that's happening right now about being unapologetically Black, right? And so natural hair, loving Black skin, loving melanin, loving who we are as a people and celebrating that, right? I have a song called I Love Being Black that I play. Brown skin girl, right? It's just so, it is like not only okay, but it's like so popular right now to just be natural and Black. So I would say code switching, I don't feel like it's as necessary now. I feel like there's a revolution. People are like, I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to be myself here at this white school, and I'm going to be myself here at home, that they don't have to turn off their Blackness or mute it, right? Like, it's okay to to be in the fullness of their Blackness and the fullness of their identity in all places. So I've tried to tell my kid not to feel the obligation of code switching, that like we got to make those other places acclimate to us instead of us acclimating to those other places. That's what I would say.
Great. Thank you so much, Trina. That is the last question that we can take right now for tonight. I do want you to talk very quickly, though, if you would, about, once again, for those who missed it, your book and the launch on the very auspicious Juneteenth.
Yeah, so my book is coming out. It is called Parenting for Liberation, A Guide for Raising Black Children. It is 20 stories from 20 different Black parents. And also coupled with the stories are tools or reflections, tangible ways to practice these liberated parenting strategies. It's available at Feminist Press, is the publisher. It's also available on traditional kind of book purchasing apps, whether that be Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. They will be mailed beginning, I believe, June 16th, so that folks can have them in hand on Juneteenth, which is the day of the launch. I'm having a book launch with Sharice Books that's based in the South, and my interviewer is Deneen Miller, who has written some incredible Black books. So if you know Deneen Miller and all of her incredible brown baby Black books, she's the one who's going to be hosting that conversation. I will put the link in the chat for, or if you have the link, if you could put in the chat for folks. And as a follow-up email to this conversation, I hope that the Mocha Moms can put all the links, but definitely it's at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be, if you go to Sharice as a bookstore online or Instagram, you can find it. If you go to parentingforliberation.org/book, it's on there as well. Hopefully you all can join. Sharice will actually be selling signed copies because I'm working on signing and then mailing them. So if you want signed copies also, they'll be available from Sharice as a bookstore.
And your links have been in the chat throughout the evening. Those of you on the call who are Mocha Moms, you will find all of the links and more reminders, easy access to Trina in Mocha Monday. So be looking out for it on Monday. Those of you who are not Mocha Moms, you need to go to www.mochamoms.org and become a Mocha Mom. Thank you so much, Trina. Before we go, I do want to announce we are very excited about next week. So we're going to continue these talks while we are in this moment and we are activated and ready to move. So next week, Dr. Tracy Kesey from the Center for Policing Equity is going to join us and talk with us about the action steps that we're taking that you all have seen in Mocha Mondays and the communications that we've sent out to you, and about the demands that we're calling for. So you all know, if you've been keeping track with Mocha Monday, that we are calling for a complete ban on chokeholds across the board. We want more comprehensive reporting. And there's a fourth piece that we want that is not something that law enforcement agencies can handle, but we do want to see it in our country, and we want to see criminalization of race-based false reporting. So y'all remember Central Park Karen? She ought to be arrested. That's what we're talking about right now. And so we're going to talk about those things and more next week with Dr. Tracy Kesey from the Center for Policing Equity. Be looking forward to that announcement and the link to join us. It's been wonderful, Trina. Again, thank you so much.
And Trina, just so you know, we have people on YouTube ordering your book right now.
Awesome.
It has been a wonderfully excellent conversation, amazing, eye-opening, great, powerful discussion. Those are the comments on YouTube.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be with so many just incredible Black mamas who are raising these liberated Black babies. And I see you, I see the work that you're doing, and I really appreciated being in this space with you all.
Great, Trina. We'll see you on Juneteenth. Mocha will be there for you.
All right.
Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much, Trina.
Thank you, Trina. Thank you, Trina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Trina.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.